Our mission is to be Earth's most customer-centric company. Now, this is both very specific, but also leaves us plenty of scope. You'll notice that while we focus very specifically on customer centricity and working backwards from our customers, we don't define in any way what areas or fields or technologies or which types of customers that we're focused on. So this leaves us with plenty of scope to innovate across many diverse fields and areas. The one thing, though, that is consistent is that we always start with our customer and we work backwards from the customer. And we want to really deeply understand our customer. This is the approach that we choose as an organization to use and focus on as a way of innovating. It's definitely not the only way that organizations can choose to focus on in terms of how they innovate or how they reinvent themselves. We're not necessarily saying it's even the best way. However, it's been very successful for us as an organization, and we choose to share it with our customers and anyone else that's interested in learning about it in the hope that it's valuable, or some parts of it might be valuable to others in their own endeavors. So, you know, there's other ways that organizations can choose to focus, and many choose to focus on competitors or maybe technology that's being developed. We choose to focus very specifically on our customers, and we believe if we do this over the long term, this will be a very successful approach for us, and we believe that's held true. So why do we invent on behalf of our customers? Well, there are many advantages to a customer-centric approach. This quote from Jeff back from the 2016 letter to shareholders outlines that one of the big benefits is that customers are always beautifully, wonderfully dissatisfied. Even when they report being happy and business is great. Now, what he means there isn't that the customers aren't satisfied, but what he means is that as customers get used to new innovations and services, those actually quickly become normal and just kind of accepted now. So what this means is you need to keep on your toes. You need to keep effectively kind of trying to think ahead and really deeply understanding your customer so that you're continuing to innovate on their behalf. You know, we believe it's not just about understanding a customer and asking them what they want, but getting to the point where you actually understand them sufficiently well that you can kind of almost predict what they're going to want or desire next, and therefore be able to invent on their behalf. Now, Amazon's been involved in a number of quite diverse business areas, and as I mentioned, you know, we're very careful in our mission statement, which focuses on being customer obsessed and being Earth's most customer obsessed organization, but it doesn't really define where or how we should do that in terms of what technologies. And we've been able to use the approach of working backwards from our customers' needs to very successfully innovate across a number of quite diverse areas, as you see on the slide. And the one kind of common thread across all these businesses was that when we got involved with them, we saw that our customers had a need, that there was a pain point that wasn't being solved or addressed, or that we could help address. And that was why we kind of got involved and worked on those businesses. You'll notice also that within those businesses, there is a willingness to kind of reinvent ourselves and to challenge the way, challenge some of our existing businesses. For example, moving into things like CDs and DVDs back in the day, was a bit of a change and a potentially a disruption to our original business, which was founded around primarily books. And then obviously moving into things like Kindle and video, again, was potentially a disruptor to those original very successful businesses. But equally, we understood that as customers got used to services and changed over time, we needed to be innovating to stay relevant to those customers. Along the way, we've also innovated in some quite diverse areas, Amazon Web Services, where I work, being one of those, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. What's interesting about this is that we have been able to use the same approach, the working backwards approach that I'm going to talk to you about today, has served us well across these quite diverse and different industries, which tends to suggest that it can be adapted and be of value to our customers to choose to explore as well. Another reason that we choose to focus on customers around our innovation strategy is that it promotes long-term thinking and long-term strategy. For example, if you were to focus on competitors or the latest technology trends, then those tend to be things that change reasonably regularly. You might end up with a strategy that you're constantly having to kind of pivot. We like to think and kind of operate quite long term at Amazon, and we focus on what we call durable needs. And we believe that customers are always going to have these inherent fundamental needs, regardless of kind of as the technology changes or as new products and services are delivered. And I'll use an example here from our Amazon.com retail business. But the examples of durable needs in this case would be things like lowering prices and increasing customer selection. And you'll see in this example, we have what we call a flywheel, and we use these quite a bit within our business to really try and understand our durable needs and the durable needs of our customers, and really focus on making sure that we're focusing on those when we innovate. So, for example, here in the Amazon retail business, for example, was if you lower prices, then that improves customer experience, and customer experience will drive more traffic, which means you bring more third-party sellers wanting to sell in the marketplace because there's more traffic, which increases selection, which improves the customer experience. And you can see how that becomes what we call a virtuous circle or a flywheel. Now, that's just one example, but you can see by focusing on those durable needs, you're building for the long term, and you're not kind of getting distracted by the latest technology. You certainly be looking at those technologies to help deliver these outcomes, but they're not kind of the strategy in themselves. So how do we organize for innovation? There are 4 key focus areas or pillars that we believe are key here. And then it's not just around technology, it covers these areas such as our culture, mechanisms, which are encoded behaviors, the architecture of both the organization and the technology we use, and also the way we organize. So I'm going to cover each of these in a little bit more detail as we go through. What we believe is important is that kind of no one of these on their own would help create the innovation culture that we have. We believe it's the combination of applying these together that helps us get to that point. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about our culture. And fundamental to the culture at Amazon, as some of you may have heard in discussions, is our leadership principles. We have 16 leadership principles at Amazon, and they serve as a common language and a common frame of reference for us to communicate and to understand how to operate in different situations. That they are really heavily used and discussed, every day. Many organizations kind of have mission statements or kind of statements that they come up with, but they're not kind of regularly discussed. One of the things that I found quite surprising when I joined Amazon was the fact that we literally do talk about and use these leadership principles every day. They'll come up in meetings. They come up in the way we interact with each other. We provide feedback. We challenge each other. They also come up in the way we recruit and the way we look at candidates as we're recruiting them. So they always, there's no kind of particular order, although typically we like to say that we always start with customer obsession. And while they've been mostly consistent over time, there is the ability to change, and they do periodically have some wording refinement. And we've also had 2 new leadership principles actually added last year, which were strive to be Earth's best employer and success and scale bring broad responsibility. Now, the reason these are important is that they help us interact and know how to respond in particular situations, but they also empower us on how to make decisions and really help us drive a level of autonomy that helps us to scale. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through the next couple of slides. You'll also notice on the slide that down the bottom it says, unless you know better ones. So one of the concepts, and we use this phrase a lot actually within the organization, which is unless you know better ways. And we say that to remind ourselves that, we shouldn't be rigid in the way we do things. We should be open to new ideas. We should be open to innovating and iterating on the way we do things, including things as fundamental as our leadership principles. So unless you know better ones is really quite key to the way we kind of apply these and many of the ways we operate within the organization. Now, you will have probably noticed that there is also a bit of tension between some of these leadership principles. For example, bias for action and dive deep. There's quite a bit of conflict or potential tension there. One is about getting on and doing things, moving fast. The other is about really deeply understanding a situation or a problem. So how do we balance those, and why do those tensions exist? So each of those leadership principles, by the way, have more detail. There was a link there which you'll have in the material that you've been provided. You can have a look afterwards and look at the website to read through in more detail if you want to. But bias for action, it reads that speed matters in business. Many decisions and actions are reversible and do not need extensive study. We value calculated risk taking. Now, how do we balance that with something like diving deep? We have a really important concept that we use, which we call the one-way or two-way door mechanism. And what this means is that if we can understand how significant and reversible the change will be, then we're able to categorize it as either a one-way or a two-way door decision. An example of a two-way door decision is something that we have a good understanding of what the effects may be, but we also clearly know that it's a reversible decision. And a good example of that might be adding new features or functionality to a web page, for example, testing a new service that we can maybe test on a select group of people and roll back. And in these cases, ideally with maybe around 70% of the knowledge of the impact, we're empowered to actually and encouraged, in fact, to go through that two-way door to make the decision and get on and do it. Because the understanding is that the learnings you're going to get by going through that two-way door, even if you discover that actually it wasn't a great idea, will be valuable, and you'll bring those learnings back through with you. The decision's reversible anyway, and you'll actually be better off than if you'd kind of done that last sort of 30% of diving deep to really qualify the problem or the opportunity. Conversely, obviously, we have one-way door decisions, and those are ones where there is a significant and irreversible consequences. So those would be physical construction, for example, building a data center, building a fulfillment center, and obviously those require a lot more diligence and approach to detail. With the two-way door decisions, the goal is that we're empowered to make those, and we don't have to seek permission to do those. And that again helps us to move fast and really scales an organization without many levels of overhead. Another leadership principle is invent and simplify. And since we're specifically talking about the Amazon innovation process, this is probably a great one to talk about. It talks about how leaders expect and require innovation from their teams, and expect teams to always find ways to simplify. People are externally aware, look for new ideas from everywhere, and are not limited to not invented here thinking. As we do things, we expect to be misunderstood for long periods of time. Now, one of the things about invent and simplify is that it's a reminder that everyone within the organization is responsible for innovation. It's not something that's done over in the Department of Innovation, which therefore kind of disempowers others because they believe someone else is doing it, but rather it's seen as that it's the responsibility of all of us. Now, it's really important to remember here that innovation isn't just necessarily, some really bold, significant step to launching a new product, but innovation can be as simple as refining and iterating on processes and mechanisms that we're using every day to make those more efficient. And the net effect of that can, particularly at scale, can be significant in terms of helping an organization like ours innovate. So this one is really there to help remind us that innovation is everyone's responsibility, and also to be open to ideas from elsewhere. As I mentioned, we also accept that we may need to be misunderstood for long periods of time. And a good example of this would probably be Amazon Kindle. So we have a saying or a kind of ethos within the organization, which is stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details. And again, this kind of is aided by the concept of working backwards, because as I explain the working backwards process, you'll understand that it's all about coming up with that vision of where we want to be and then working backwards from that. So that's the vision that we're stubborn on. And the stubborn vision we had for Kindle was that any person should be able to get basically any book ever written and get access to that and be able to start reading it within 60 seconds or less anywhere on the planet. Now, that was the vision when it launched in 2007. The original minimum lovable product that you see on the left was possibly a little bit less lovable than the current iteration. But it did really prove some of those initial goals. And it, at the time, we got lots of challenges around it. I think it was probably heavier than most of the books that it was intended to replace. But it did prove those concepts. It proved the connectivity concept, for example, in terms of being able to develop and download and get access to those books. Fast forward to the current generation, and you see where certainly a lot closer now to realizing that original vision and the benefit of being misunderstood originally, but persevering and being stubborn on that vision. Another example of this is actually Amazon Web Services, the business that I work in within Amazon, and one that you may be reasonably familiar with, the cloud computing business within the Amazon group. Originally when this was launched, it was seen as quite a risky business. There were many questions around what did Amazon know about this business. Was it going to be a distraction from the core business at the time of Amazon.com? But one of the things that we knew at the time is that we had really built up a lot of experience in building reliable, scalable, cost-effective infrastructure at massive scale. And we understood that would be valuable to our customers and to customers in other businesses who would be able to benefit from that sort of technology access as well. So that was our stubborn vision. And as we've fast forward to a decade and a half later, we have now over 200 plus services. We've had multiple price reductions and millions of active customers across the globe every month. So I'm going to move on a little bit from the culture space now into mechanisms and talk about how we use these within an organization. So a mechanism is an encoded behavior that helps us to understand how to act and operate in a particular situation. Typically involves building a tool, which will usually be a software process. And it's a complete process that includes adoption, inspection, and iteration. So what we're doing is making sure that when we build something, we're not just kind of building it and relying on it going forward. We're making sure that, firstly, that it's adopted and therefore is useful, but we're also really heavily inspecting it to make sure we're getting the results that we want. If it was intended to try and improve a particular feature, maybe it was to try and reduce waste in a fulfillment center or to speed up an order process, then we want to make sure we're inspecting to see we are actually getting the desired results, and then continue iterating, because once we've implemented one implementation, there may be ways that we can refine and iterate that further. We have a number of different mechanisms that we use within the company, but probably one of the hallmark mechanisms would be our working backwards mechanism, which is one of the areas that we're primarily talking around today. And this is one of the areas that I work extensively with our customers on and help share this process with our customers with their own product development. And the working backwards mechanism, as the name kind of implies, it starts by really trying to deeply understand our customer. What is it that they need? What is the pain point or challenge they're having that we may be able to help remove and solve for them? And so to do this, we start with the customer, and the customer is always in the center. And we really understand what it is that build up quite a knowledge of that customer. We'll build detailed personas of an indicative customer in this space. We like to think about things like pain points. What are the influences? What is it they're trying to achieve? What are their goals? We'll often get quite deep research or maybe interviews with customers to validate those assumptions and those persona maps once we've created them. And then we focus deeply in the second step on, really understanding what is the problem that they have today that's within our remit to solve. What challenge or pain point do they have that we could help address? And so we focus really deeply on understanding that. We do this usually as a team exercise. And this is where we would introduce an ideation exercise where we'll come up with ideas to solve that problem. We use a process called Crazy Eights, where we try and encourage people to come up with a lot of ideas in a short space of time, which forces them to be quite creative rather than just kind of bringing up the most simple and low risk ideas. Another approach is often to think about what would be the worst thing we could do for that customer in this situation, and conversely, the opposite of the worst thing will often be one of the the best ideas we might have to help solve problems for that customer. Once we have an idea on that, and as a team we typically vote on those ideas to understand which ones we want to focus on first. We're now in a position where we understand probably the most impactful problem we can solve for our most representative customer, and that puts us in a pretty good space to then start looking to design and build. And we do all of this before we cut any lines of code. This is right at the beginning of the process, and the goal of this is to make sure we have a really clear view as to what it is we're wanting to build and deliver before we start actually building any kind of product or developing any software. So to do that, we in the fourth step, we actually produce a number of documents, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about these as we go through. But they're a press release, frequently asked questions, and visuals. And the press release is quite a concise one-page document which talks quite specifically around what we're wanting to do. It really defines, who the audience for the product or services is perceived to be, what their challenge or situation is now, and how by introducing the product or service, we hope that to leave them in a better place than they are now. We use these documents to get a really clear vision. The frequently asked questions is where we challenge ourselves to come up with the questions we're expecting to be asked as we go through, both from the customers, but also from stakeholders. And we use that as a process to test and iterate, to seek feedback. And you'll see that kind of aligns to the mechanisms I talked to, where we're always kind of applying it, then iterating and making sure that we're getting the outputs that we want. So when we're looking at customers, we as I say, we look quite specifically. We'll build persona maps to really kind of deeply understand the customer. We'll look at context too. Context can be super important, as I'm sure you're probably aware as UX people. For example, the customer in the bottom left of the illustration there, who's probably commuting on public transport, maybe in a situation where there's other people closely around, so it's probably not wanting to, interact verbally with any services, for example, could be quite different to the context of the family in their living room, where that may be a much more acceptable way of interacting. We also remember that customers can be internal, and as I was saying, with innovations, it's not always about moonshots. Sometimes it's about refining and iterating on existing processes. So our customers, maybe one of our internal staff, and helping them come up with a more innovative way of doing a particular piece of work. The other thing that's really important here is that we continue to seek feedback and input. In AWS, for example, around 90% of the features that we develop and release actually come directly from hearing what customers need, or customer feedback from previous sessions, from previous discussions. And then we'd like to think that the other 10% comes from being close enough to our customers, like I said, to be able to invent on their behalf. These are the 5 key questions that we really focus on during the working backwards process. And initially they may seem quite simplistic, but they really guide us and guide the customer through understanding what it is they're wanting to do. What is it that we're trying to solve? What's the problem or opportunity we're looking to try and solve for the customer? Are we actually clear what the benefit to the customer is going to be, and what the most important benefit will be to the customer when we do implement the service or functionality? How do we know what the customer needs or want? Have we done sufficient research? Have we got market feedback, and make sure that we're not kind of operating in a silo? Are we thinking about customers in different situations? We're obviously all probably reasonably technically savvy within the organization, but we need to make sure we're developing products and services for a really broad and diverse range of people. And then finally, obviously, an area that's near and dear to yourselves would be, what's the customer experience going to look like? We also like to challenge ourselves to think big, to think large. Thinking small can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we do this, again, as I said, by really challenging ourselves to come up with those ideas and come up with as many ideas as we can during the ideation process. Our goal from the working backwards engagement is also to come up with what we call a minimum lovable product. We want to have something that customers will actually enjoy, but it really is in the first iteration. In order to actually get something shipped and get something out there, we are really focused on what's the most what's the most important problem we can solve for the most indicative customer first, and really focusing and honing in on that. As I said, we do this with 3 key documents as part of the working backwards process, and these are the outputs of the process, which we continue to seek feedback and review on and iteration on. But these artifacts become really important for the ongoing development of the product or service. They make it very clear to anyone joining that process or developing the product, what was the original intention? Why are we doing this? Who are we doing it for? What's the problem we're looking to solve? We use the frequently asked questions to, as I said earlier, to dive deep and really deeply understand problems, what concerns or questions might customers have, what concerns or questions might our stakeholders have. Examples of that might be from a customer perspective: how much will this cost? How long does it take to get set up? How does it work with services that I'm already using, for example? From a stakeholder perspective, it might be what's the expected time frame and cost of developing this service? How is this differentiated from other offerings that might already exist in the market? Those would be examples of questions. And when we're working through the working backwards process, we won't necessarily know the answer to all those frequently asked questions, but it's just by actually writing the question out and identifying the question that's really important and valuable, because typically that helps steer the process as you go through the development process, and then you can over time answer those questions that you weren't able to initially answer. And then finally, we'll use visuals, and we use wireframes and mock-ups, and the quality of these will kind of improve with the maturity of the product, I guess, as we go through the working backwards mechanism, get more feedback and iteration. But we use these to demonstrate what the experience is going to be like for the customer, to make sure that that's going to make sense, to also share it in another form for people that maybe will get more value out of that in a visual form than by reading the document. So these are 3 artifacts together that provide us with really sound base to then progress into building, to working with design teams, to working with software development teams, for example, and also the marketing in terms of building out those products and services. The press release has a fairly defined structure. As I mentioned, we're really focused on defining what it is that we're doing, who the audience that we're doing it for. And the press release will actually inherently answer those 5 key questions that I identified earlier. We don't specifically put those questions in there, but they will all be covered off in there. And the other thing that we do in the press release is we actually write a customer testimonial. So at the point where we're starting with the working backwards process, this will be a hypothetical or a made-up customer testimonial, but this forces us into the shoes of the customer and to think, well, what would the customer actually say about this? And that's yet another form of kind of validation that what we're doing actually is going to make sense to people that are going to be looking to consume this, not just to ourselves. We have quite a writing culture within Amazon. We tend not to use tools like PowerPoint, for example, as much internally. We tend to prefer to write documents because we believe that forces people to put a lot more detail into their thinking and share that detail with their colleagues. And we go through multiple iterations. We actually have quite regularly, we have these doc read meetings. When you first join, it's quite interesting. The first time you join one of these, you're going to join a meeting and everyone just sits in silence for 20 minutes reading the document first, which is, it was certainly not something I'd experienced elsewhere before I joined Amazon, but it becomes kind of natural over time and quite a really useful process. And then for the remainder of the meeting, we go through and discuss, and people will come up with ideas, suggestions, feedback, and again, really honed and focused on those leadership principles that I talked about earlier. So, are you thinking big enough in this? Have you dived deep enough to really understand this problem, for example? Moving on now to the third pillar, which is architecture. So within the organization, we believe self-service platforms and the ability for people to be able to get access to the tools they need free of constraints and free of gatekeepers is super important to people being able to innovate and operate at scale, and teams to be able to operate autonomously without having to wait for other teams, which is really important. And we also believe that this actually, quite interestingly, also maps very much to the technology and the way we apply technology. Again, we very much believe in providing, from a technology sense, the right tools and available and technology architectures available to our builders to be able to really get on and experiment, to try things, to go through those two-way doors and come back through them if they need to, and to really kind of operate at scale and iterate. Like many organizations over a decade ago, Amazon ended up having quite a monolithic architecture for our primary Amazon.com. And this was really inhibiting us. We couldn't make the iterations, we couldn't add new products and features and services as quickly as we wanted. We weren't able to scale it up as quickly as we wanted. So a lot of work went into re-architecting that as a microservices architecture, to providing the ability to interact between different components using APIs, but giving us the freedom and ability to iterate and innovate on individual components without causing constraints more broadly. And as I mentioned earlier, the architecture that we built to enable this to happen for our own organization ended up being what we shared to our customers as Amazon Web Services, because we understood that we had decades of experience building and operating infrastructure resiliently at scale and cost effectively, and we wanted to share that with our customers. We believe it's really important to lower the cost of failure, and many organizations still struggle with not having access to the right tools and technology. It's really hard for the teams to get access to things, and that really slows them down and inhibits innovation. As I mentioned, we believe having the right tools is really important. I'm not going to go through these in detail, but the portfolio of services available within AWS really helps builders, both within our organization and within our customers, to be able to experiment and build those services. And Andy, our CEO, likes to say that there's no compression algorithm for experience, and that really comes through. And as I mentioned, the experience we bring in terms of operating our own platforms at scale, the learnings, the lessons learned from that, we apply to the services and capabilities that we share with our customers as well. Now, moving on to our final pillar, which is the way we organize and the way we structure within the organization. Amazon famously, or possibly infamously, uses the terminology of the two pizza team. Now, the reason we call it this is the myth kind of goes that within the organization, if your team becomes larger than can easily be fed by two pizzas, then your team's probably getting too large. And what's going to happen then is that there will be administrative overhead, the effort involved in keeping everyone up to date and coordinating across people within the team is actually going to become burdensome and start slowing you down as a team. So we like to operate relatively small, autonomous teams that are empowered to get on and do things. They'll often have diverse skills within them so that they're able to, kind of operate as a unit, as almost a mini startup. And when teams do start to grow too large, we do actually split teams out, and often that'll mean focusing on maybe a subset of what they were focusing on earlier. It is one of the things that is a bit of a constant, is the change as teams kind of grow and move around, and it's something I've seen a little bit of the time that I've been here. We also like to hire builders, so we're really seeking to get people involved and to make this culture of innovation work. We want people that want to kind of look into the future a little bit, that maybe aren't satisfied always with the status quo, are going to look to iterate and innovate. And as I mentioned, that can be just innovating and iterating on everyday things and services to make those efficient as well. It's not always about kind of coming up with the next moonshot. In fact, the innovating and iterating on improving everyday things and making those operate better is probably equally, if not more important, as we go through. So just recapping, these are the 4 areas that we believe are important to an overall culture of innovation, and that they kind of operate and are required to operate together. They depend on each other, and there is some overlap, and that's important. A good example of that's probably the way that the architecture for our technology and tools is also quite similar to the way we architect, the way our people are, in terms of having no gatekeepers, access to change and iterate things without having to wait for others, for example. Now, one of the things that we think is really important to share with customers, and one of the things we often see customers struggling with, is that they often believe that innovation is just a technology challenge. It's something that can be solved by technology alone, and we would really emphasize that we believe it's much more than that. It is about having the right culture in place, the right architectures to support innovation, to enable those teams to move fast and to iterate and to experiment, to lower that cost of failure. Also the way we're organized and the way we manage and monitor things with mechanisms. So it's really important that organizations, we believe, understand that there is a lot more than just technology and innovating and being an innovative organization. One of the things that I do is share this approach with our customers, both in terms of a talk similar to this, but also we actually operate working backwards engagements for our customers. So we'll guide them through the process. We don't tell them how to solve their problems at their organization. They're the subject matter experts in that field. What we do is facilitate and talk to them about how we would apply the process and teach them that process. I'll kind of wrap up just with a couple of quotes from Jeff, which I think are really relevant here. Obviously, Jeff Bezos, our founder and the original CEO. Andy Jassy is now the CEO of Amazon. But Jeff said failure and innovation are inseparable twins. And really what he's getting at here is that to be truly innovative, to move the needle forward, there needs to be a risk factor. You need to be doing some experimenting. If you really know the outcome and there's kind of no need to experiment, then you're really probably not innovating. You're not really pushing the boat out very far. So that's, I think, quite an important concept, and one that was covered by Jeff in his annual letter to shareholders back in 2015. And it's also important to remember that innovation comes in many forms and many scales. And helping others and providing the right framework to help others unleash their creativity is super important. So thank you. Hopefully you found that useful and maybe bits that would be relevant and of interest to your own organizations. Yeah, I'd certainly love to hear any feedback, and quite open to any questions that you might have. And I'm spotting on the video one of my former colleagues in the chat. So hi, how are you?
Right. That's awesome. Thanks, Keith. And we have a couple of questions that came up as well. So the first one is, what are some of the challenges you have with feedback from customers when implementing working backwards?
Yeah, so some of the challenges are our organizations just really not relating to how they could apply it to their own organization. You know, they obviously appreciate that not all organizations are necessarily structured the way that we are, for example, but that doesn't preclude you from using the working backwards approach to actually, really trying to deeply understand the problem that you're trying to solve and who you're trying to solve it for first. Regardless of the approval process you need to go through to build or iterate later on, you can still make use of that process. In fact, we would argue that it actually can be really useful in getting stakeholders aligned. So if you are in a more traditional organization where you need to provide some sort of formal, or comply to some sort of formal governance and get stakeholders on board, then actually being able to present a press release and frequently asked questions is a great way of doing that, and really making sure that they understand what it is you're trying to achieve and do. Having many organizations and people I talk to, while they love some of the concepts we have around the way we structure and we operate, they do feel that they're not necessarily as empowered to make those decisions. And in that situation, I would kind of suggest that you maybe start quite small. You can test and iterate on small process improvements, and maybe use the process to demonstrate the value of some of these approaches there, rather than maybe starting on something larger.
Okay. Another one that came up is, would you recommend the working backwards mechanism to small companies or government entities that struggle with costs and time constraints?
Yeah, I work primarily with government entities, so we do use it a lot with government entities, and they find it really interesting. This year I've worked across quite diverse organizations, primarily in what we call the public sector space, so government, education, and not-for-profits. But equally, we do use this process and recommend it for organizations of all types, including startups and small businesses. One of the benefits of this process for a small business or a startup, which those organizations are usually quite resource constrained, they may have only quite small teams. This process really helps you focus on what are the most important things you should be doing first. What is the fundamental problem that we want to try and solve, the most impactful problem that we can try and solve for our intended customer first, and really hone in on that. And I think that's quite valuable in terms of building your minimum viable, or as we like to say in Amazon, minimum lovable product. So valuable there. Governments find it really useful. I work with a lot of teams that, one of the things there is that we spend quite a bit of time often talking around who's the customer, because we always try and think of the customer as the furthest possible out person that we can be, has the choice maybe to choose to use this product or service or not. With government, oftentimes it's quite interesting. People will be thinking more about what we would call stakeholders. So they might be thinking more around the minister or the chief executive, rather than actually maybe the citizen that ultimately they're kind of delivering services to. So, we find that it's quite a challenging but very useful approach for those people too, in that government organisations. Worked on a number where we've been involved in some healthcare discussions. This was in Australia, but really getting those teams to think about the fact that it was actually the clinician or the patient that was their customer, and how they should be thinking about that and using that to impact the way they're developing services, new services or products, was quite impactful for them. So really believe that it operates well across quite diverse sizes and types of organizations.
Another question we have is from Stephen. He's asking, are there any sources of customer insights that have surprised you by the value they provide, such as tech forums, reviews, etc.?
In terms of going through the working backwards process, in terms of, sorry, is that question related to how we understand the customer and getting information around how we understand the customer?
I'm guessing it's about surprising customer insights that came up using the working backwards methodology.
Right. Yeah, well, certainly in terms of trying to deeply understand the customers, we use a number of different approaches. So we use research, customer insights that we may have in terms of product usage. We will actually do interviews. We'll often bring customers into the working backwards process. So either for part or all of it, to actually be involved in the idea generation or to review the work that the teams have done. And that can be really impactful. And yeah, oftentimes when I've been working on a working backwards engagement with a customer, the actual solution that they choose or the most impactful problem they choose to work on first may be something that was different from kind of what I perceived might have been the case before I got started, which does show that you need to go into it with an open mind.
Okay. Deepti says, beautifully explained, Keith. Could you please comment on identifying and approaching the target audience?
Yeah, so that, as I said, it can be quite a challenging question, and it's one that we can often spend a little bit of time on. What we're looking to do is make sure that we, as I said, we're trying to look for the furthest out customer, the one that actually kind of has the choice to use the product or service that we might have in mind. We're trying to understand, what we try and start the process understanding a problem they have, but not actually with a solution in mind. So we understand that they may have a need that hasn't been met, or that they think there's a better way that we could be doing something. But we try not actually solution at all in the early stages. So we come up with what we call a how might we statement. And we then really try and focus in on what is, by really looking at building out that persona map, really understanding our customer, and we'll get input and research and maybe interviews with customers. What are the pain points? What are they trying to achieve? What are their goals? What motivates them? What influences them? And then from there, really hone in on what we believe the most important problem is that we can solve for that customer first, because we want to focus on the most impactful problem for our minimum lovable product launch.
Okay, and since we're almost due for time, one last question from Jade, which is how big is the pizza for the team metric?
Yeah, so good question. There's a bit of debate on what types of pizza we get, and fortunately, when we do order pizzas, we do normally order more than 2 pizzas, despite the fact that it's only supposed to be a 2-pizza team. But yeah, it's definitely open to interpretation. I mean, the larger the pizza, the better. There's no particular rules around whether it's thick crust or thin crust that I'm aware of, but I'm sure if I dive deep enough in our internal wikis, I could probably find quite extensive debate on those topics.
Yep. Awesome. Oh, well, another big thanks, Keith. This has been really great. And thanks to the UX Wellington meetup team. Follow us on LinkedIn, UX Wellington, Twitter, Welly@UX. You'll find Keith's socials as well and the document in the chat. And thanks to everyone for attending today.